Hello, and welcome to Happy Trails Hiking. This is Travel Tuesday, and my name is Kay, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. I've got a great guest for you today, so I want you to stay tuned for Gretchen Garrison, and we're going to talk about Nebraska travel today. I do want to let you know that this show is brought to you by our patrons on Patreon, and you could find that link and become a patron by clicking on patreon.com/happytrailshiking. And our patrons are Panic D Paranormal History, Our Haunted Travels, Deb Shane, Pam Huff, Nerding for Nature, and Needs More Subs. Thank you very much to those patrons that support us in that way. All right. We have a good room with us already today. Deb Shane is in the house, as well as Desmond Stonders, Marty's Crew, Our Family Adventures, and Halos and Heathens, Neil. It's good to see all of you today. Let me tell you about our guest. Native Nebraskan Gretchen Garrison loves to explore the stories that define her state. Understanding more about Nebraska places and people, both past and present, has become her mission. She considers it a privilege that she gets to tell these tales through her articles, books, and speaking engagements. In 2020, Gretchen has 2 books coming out about her hometown, Lincoln, Nebraska. One is a history lover's guide to Lincoln with History Press. Then 100 Things to Do in Lincoln Before You Die from Reedy's Press. Gretchen and her husband Kyle are raising 4 kids on a southeast Nebraska acreage property that came with the best sunrises. I love sunrises. Her first History Press book, Detour Nebraska, Historical Destinations and Natural Wonders, was published in 2017. I would like you all to welcome Gretchen Garrison. Thanks for being here, Gretchen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. It's great to see you. And I know you've had a busy day already and that you're in a special location. Can you tell us?
I am in a special location today. I am at the Rogers House in downtown Lincoln. They're graciously letting me talk to you here. And so it is absolutely a beautiful spot to get to have a talk about Nebraska.
That is awesome. Can you tell me a little more about Rogers House since you're there and what you were doing there this morning?
I can tell you about Rogers House. Rogers House is one of the places that I'm featuring in my next book, 100 Things to Do in Lincoln Before You Die. It has been operated as a bed and breakfast for the last 35 years. And they have some new owners that definitely would love to show you Nebraska hospitality. So they are currently doing some updates to make it even more friendly for guests. But Rogers House was built in Lincoln in 1914 by a retired banker. And so it was family owned for a long time. And then it was used as a fraternity for a while and used as a transitional home. And now it's been a bed and breakfast here in the Lincoln area. It was Lincoln's first bed and breakfast, and it's been around for a long time, but it's absolutely beautiful in here. I can try to, hopefully it won't be too dizzy, show you just a little bit here of what they have to offer. It's definitely a gorgeous place.
It is beautiful. And I love the white woodwork and the beautiful windows that are behind you. They're fantastic. Sounds like
yes, I'm sitting here in the sunroom, and even on a cloudy Nebraska morning, it's still definitely a cheery room.
It looks like it is. That's excellent. It looks like an excellent place to go in Lincoln, and a nice place to stay too if you want to go.
Definitely.
Hopefully we'll have some people who want to go visit Lincoln after we're done here today.
I hope so. That's definitely the goal.
Yes, exactly. Well, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started writing about Nebraska?
Well, I was a part of a Mothers of Preschoolers group, and I had done the publicity, and I had really liked writing. And I have 4 kids that are 6 years. I had 4 kids in 6 years, and so I really liked the writing. And so honestly, I felt like God told me to start writing about Nebraska. And I actually homeschool my kids. And so we were going to study Nebraska anyway. It was the year we were set to do that. And I thought, well, if I'm writing about Nebraska, I'll be a lot more deliberate in what I ask and where we visit and what we do. And that definitely proved to be the case. I had no idea writing was going to be included in this process. Didn't know I was going to write books. Didn't really have that in mind, but it's kind of been a cool part of the process.
Awesome. That's super. I used to be a teacher, for those
of you
who might not know, and for Gretchen, who I haven't met yet until, well, we met the other day when we were setting up for the show, but a lot of these travel bloggers that I've been interviewing, I met at a conference this summer or in different places, but this is the first time to get to know Gretchen and Gretchen to get to know me a little bit. So
yeah, I didn't know you were a teacher. What did you teach?
I taught the fine arts. So I had music and drama classes, and I was the performing arts director for a local private high school here.
Well, wonderful. Well, I was a 5th grade teacher for 5 years in the Lincoln area. And then, so homeschooling was a good fit. And I feel like my approach, because of being a teacher, is definitely different to being a travel blogger, just because I don't want to just show you the place. I want to tell you about it and intrigue you as to why you should visit. Exactly.
And that's why I feel like when Matt and I go and travel places and we plan our trips, we really get into it and showing people and making good, I hope, recommendations for people as we travel. So I think being a teacher is a great asset, or those assets that you learned from being a teacher are great assets to being a travel writer and a travel professional in general. So
I definitely would like to think so. I know my kids though will say, you have a story for everything, Mom. You always have a lesson. And I don't mean to do that, but you do pick up things, and the history that matters is what's really fun.
And you can tell that that you're passionate about it. And that's exemplary. And I love that. So, all right. So I have been looking at your blog in the last week or so, and I really enjoyed your Detour Nebraska challenge. And I really want you to tell our audience a couple of the most surprising facts you learned about your own state when working on the Detour Nebraska challenge. And maybe you want to tell them what the Detour Nebraska challenge was, but
yes, I can definitely do that. Give me just a second. I dropped the book. Of course.
No.
So this is my book, Detour Nebraska. And what I did was, right before the book came out, I spent 31 days telling some of the things that didn't make it into the book. And I plan on doing that with my next books as well, just because you can't fit everything in that you want to say.
Sure.
And so what I just had fun showing different churches and different things like that aren't necessarily destinations that the traveler would want to go to, but still parts that make Nebraska pretty. Some of the things that have surprised me on Nebraska is the fact, one key thing is we do not have cell phone service all throughout the state. So if you are traveling in Nebraska, you definitely can't rely on Google Maps. You actually might need to use a paper map for part of it. Now, this isn't true like in the metro areas like Omaha and Lincoln and Grand Island or Kearney and Hastings, anything like that. But especially in the Sandhills, it's just beauty out there. There's not a lot of cell phone towers and things like that. And there may not be a gas station on every corner. So if you're traveling through the whole state, you definitely want to be prepared. So that was one thing that was surprising to me.
Okay.
I think, and this wasn't surprising, for a while, our slogan in Nebraska was visit Nebraska, visit nice. And there's so many kind people in Nebraska. There are people that love to tell stories, people that have a lot to share. And so I don't think I realized, but there is close to 90, we have 93 counties, and almost every single county has their own county museum, which I think is definitely an asset because it's people collecting their community's history and their way of letting the stories live on. And so I absolutely loved that. That was really surprising. And I just list them in my book. I didn't get to tell about all of them individually. That would be kind of a fun book to do someday, is to talk about what the different county histories have. So that was definitely surprising to me. The other thing that, again, kind of, I guess, goes along with not having a cell phone on every tower, but or every corner is the fact that you do have to, especially in smaller towns, call ahead to make sure that the place you want to visit or the restaurant that you want to go to will be open. I've had that happen several times where I planned on stopping by, and for various reasons, either it's a day or two before Memorial Day, let's take off extra time, or some of the funny things like that, where you just are like, okay, well, I guess I won't go to your restaurant today.
Right. Well, smaller towns do that fairly often. I mean, I think fairly often. I lived in a small town in Iowa, and if anything from a family emergency, which, you have to close.
Yes.
To, hey, we just wanted to go on a picnic,
Yeah, exactly.
So it would close down a restaurant or like the farm store or whatever there in town.
Oh, we're gonna open an hour later today, or
right, exactly.
We're gonna close early. Whereas places in the city do that too, but they usually announce it on Facebook. That's not really the case for Nebraska locations. They may or may not use social media. So
right, yeah. A couple of things. Marty's Crew, our family adventure, says, "Hello, neighbor." They're from Kansas, so
fun.
They are always looking for new places to travel that are more local to them. Lots of these travel bloggers talk about places that are way far away, or like national parks out west, or things like that. So Marty's Crew is always looking for some place that's kind of close. So Nebraska would be pretty close. And for those of you who are in the chat, I did drop the Detour Nebraska book link, the Amazon link, into the chat. So if you're interested,
thank you.
Taking a look at that would be awesome. Open up a new tab later.
I definitely included Lincoln and Omaha in my book because they're cities, but I did try to write about a lot of places that maybe people aren't familiar with. Just for instance, we love our zoo in Omaha. It's amazing. It's always ranked as one of the best in the world. But you know what? They don't need any publicity from me because they already are packed and they already have a lot of people. But for instance, for this person in Kansas, hopefully they've been up to the Homestead National Monument. It's the one national monument that we have here in Lincoln. We somehow ended up with the very first homesteader, January 1st, 1863. Daniel Freeman knew the right people, and so he filed his homestead shortly after midnight. And so that's how a lot of Nebraska was settled through that Homestead Act, which gave pioneers 160 acres if they were willing to stick around and work the land for a minimum number of years. And so that museum is top notch. It is one of the hands-on museums where kids can do activities and they can end up with a ranger badge. And so that's one example. That's really not a small town museum because it's Smithsonian quality. But at the same time, it's just a great way to experience Nebraska.
Yes, exactly. That's a wonderful place to go and to see. And I go and collect the national park stamps in my national park passport book. And so
lovely. Well, you need to come to Nebraska and go to that one. It's very cool.
Man, I need to spend way more time in Nebraska. We just haven't gotten over there to do it yet. We keep traveling through, like we drove through Nebraska on our way back from our big road trip last year, but we enjoyed the campgrounds that we stayed at in Nebraska so much. But we were actually at Pawnee Prairie Reservoir.
Okay.
Yes. And so we loved that campground. It was fantastic. We will be back there for sure.
It is definitely beautiful. And that's one thing about Nebraska is a lot of times people think of Nebraska as the drive-through state, or they think I-80, it's flat. Well, if you get off of I-80, this was one surprising fact to me, the fact that Nebraska's elevation from like the southeast corner of Nebraska to the northwest corner changes more drastically than it does between Nebraska and the East Coast. And so it is a huge change in elevation. We actually go up quite a bit and like over 5,000 feet, which is not 5,000 feet. That doesn't sound right. But anyway, it goes up a lot across the state. And so there's just some beautiful hills and rolling hills. And so we don't have mountains, but we do have just some beautiful places to see and to explore. I think that surprises people if they get off the main roads.
There certainly are a lot of beautiful places to explore in the Midwest. For those of you who are just joining us in our live show, I do want to mention that this is Gretchen Garrison, and she is a native Nebraskan and talks a lot about Nebraska travel and Lincoln, Nebraska travel, especially. And if you have any questions about traveling in Nebraska or things that you would want to know about specifically, please make sure to add those into the chat and I will try to get those questions to her. We have had a few extra people come in. Gretchen, I do want to just mention them. Desmond Saunders does say that cell phones sound like, or no cell phones sound like paradise, just saying from earlier.
Well.
And our Haunted Travels, Panic D, is here and would be interested in any paranormal locations that you would happen to know. Marty's Crew, Our Family Adventures, says that they're hoping to get to Nebraska this year for sure. And they're interested in the Homestead Monument and the Omaha Zoo. So those are two things that are on their wish list. And Down the Rabbit Hole is here, and she's from Canada. So it's good to see you, Marty. Thanks for being here. And Colorado Martini is another travel vlogger, and she's from Colorado. So thank you all for being here. And if you have questions for Gretchen, please put those in the chat and I'll get those to her. My next question for you is, you mentioned the elevation a couple of minutes ago. You say that there are 3 regions to Nebraska on your blog. Can you talk to us a little bit about the difference in the regions and what we might find there if we traveled?
Okay. Well, I can definitely do that. And I think I updated it a little bit actually after my blog. As far as in my book, it's divided by regions. And so I got permission from Nebraska Tourism to use some designations that they had several years ago. So my book's actually divided into 7 regions.
Ooh.
And so the metro region would have obviously the most museums because that includes like Lincoln and Omaha and just a bigger city type feel. But then the Homestead National Monument, for instance, that's in the Pioneer region. And so there's a lot of pioneers came through Nebraska and then ended up settling here in Nebraska. And so that is definitely just some great museums that and places to go. Like you can see, besides, for instance, the Homestead National Monument, nearby there's the Rock Creek Station, which is actually the first place where Wild Bill Hickok became an outlaw. He was there at that station. And so you can see wagon ruts near Lincoln. A place that will be in my upcoming book is Spring Creek Prairie Audubon Center, which was a cutoff point of the Oregon Trail. And so that's kind of fun. You can take a hike there and hike. And I kept looking for the ruts, and finally the lady's like, no, you can just feel them under your feet. So that was kind of interesting. It's a little bit interesting of a hike across tall grass prairie when it's uneven ground like that. But so near Pioneer, we have the Frontier Trails, which again would be like where Fort Kearney is located and some of those earlier places. And then in Southwest Nebraska, there's the Prairie Lakes region. And so there's a lot of reservoirs and lakes where people can go boating and great places to camp. You're talking about camping in Nebraska. There's a lot of really beautiful campgrounds in that area.
Lee Johnson is here. I don't know Lee Johnson, but welcome. And I just they added in that the lowest elevation in Nebraska is 840 feet and the highest elevation is 5,424 feet. So you were close with your 5,000.
Thank you for those numbers. I hadn't researched the exact ones, but I knew it was a big change.
It is a big change for a Midwest Plains state, you know? That's a big elevation. I mean, the highest elevation here in Missouri is, I believe, 1,800 feet. So not high at all, but you guys get closer to the Badlands and the Rockies than we do. So
definitely. Well, and I would have predicted differently with the Ozark Hills there that it would have been a higher elevation.
The highest elevation is Tom's Hawk Mountain and Tom's Hawk State Park. And it's, I believe, just a little under 1,800 feet. So, yeah.
Well, our highest elevation, I think, is called Panorama Point. And I have not been there, but it's in the middle of a field. And evidently you have to drive like half an hour off roads to get there. So that's on my wish list of some place that I want to stop at some point.
If we ever come to Nebraska, we'll pick you up and then we'll go.
I would love that. That would be a really great excuse.
That would be fun. All right. I'm coming.
So you're asking me for more regions, and we had, excuse me, the Lewis and Clark region, because Lewis and Clark traveled right on the edge, basically, of the Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota border. And so that would be like where Ponca State Park is. And up there is a place called Ashfall, which is a place where a lot of prehistoric animals were buried suddenly. So you can see it's an active dig site. So you can go there in the summer and they actually are still performing the dig. So you can see archaeologists and paleontologists in action. So that's really fun. One of the prettiest parts of the state, and this would be really the only place that probably doesn't have great cell phone coverage, is the Sandhills, which is so beautiful. It's one of my favorite places to drive, is the Sandhills. Mm-hmm. And then next to that is the Panhandle. And so that is the part where there's a lot of bluffs and a lot of Native American history and a lot of, you can go rock exploring and Fort Robinson and things like that. Exactly. You pulled up my map. So.
I did pull up your map. This is what I found. And I guess I didn't count well enough with the 7. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Nice.
Yes. And so, I think at one point, so thank you for telling me that. I actually do need to update. I think at one point I did just talk about 3 main regions, but this is just kind of in the area and the way that I've designated on my blog, just because I feel like they go by county lines. And so they're pretty distinct.
Okay, cool.
So
Gail Crabtree has stopped in, and she's done a lot of driving across our country. And she said that there's a nice museum just off the interstate in that area as well. And I don't know exactly. There's a little
I'm not sure which one she's referencing, but there is a museum that goes over the interstate. So I'm wondering if she is telling about that one. It is in Kearney. And so it's really a cool museum that it's one of our family's favorites. And now I'm trying to remember the exact name of it, but it is basically about the Platte River and you walk over it and you get to hear history with cassettes, or with, not with cassette, with audio. And so you get to hear a history of the Mormon Trail, the Oregon Trail, and things like that.
That was a really neat one. We were pulling our camper. And there's a camper question just coming up, but we were pulling our camper. And so we didn't get off soon enough, and turning around was just not an option. So one of these years, what was I going to say? Okay. Down the Rabbit Hole Travel asks, when you road trip, Gretchen, do you camp, hotel, or use a camper? When I go with my kids, the plan is camping because we don't own a trailer and the hotels are too pricey. So when you travel around your state, how do you and your family travel?
We tend to do a lot of day trips, simply because, as having 6 of us in our family, the hotels are more crowded than they used to be. And so we do a lot of day trips. But I will tell her that camping in Nebraska, there are so many great places. Our Nebraska Games and Parks has multiple, both official, there's a little bit of a between parks and just, but there's Mahoney State Park is right in between Omaha and Lincoln. If you're wanting to do some of the sites right between there, there's Ponca State Park. There is Chadron State Park. They're just all across. There's so many great places. And one really fun thing that they do every summer is they do the Great Park Pursuit. And so you can they pick 20 places across the state, and you can go there and you can get a rubbing of, and they have prizes. So you don't even have to be from Nebraska to win the prizes, but they have some really great prizes if you go to their designated things. So if you're wanting to go kind of off the beaten trail and explore a lot of different places, that going to those 20 places would be a really fun way to see the state.
That would be I wrote it down. That would be an excellent thing to do. One thing that I noticed about Nebraska as we were traveling through, we came from Grand Tetons, and we covered Wyoming in one day and then camped overnight. And then we had a weekend to spend on our way home. And one thing I noticed was that not only state parks have great campsites or campgrounds, but just some of the regular natural areas and reservoirs and places across the state have great campgrounds in Nebraska. Some, like if I'm traveling across Missouri, such as, Mark Twain National Forest has some places to camp, but they're walk-in, you have to backpack. And that's not conducive to traveling across the state unless you're backpacking. But we had a camper. So I noticed that was a really cool thing about that.
I would definitely agree with you on that.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Down the rabbit hole says I can't day trip it down to Yellowstone or Oregon though. We'll try our hand at camping. Marty, we should talk about camping and campsites a little bit at another time, but I think camping in Nebraska is one of the easier states to camp in that I've been in America so far. We haven't been camping for a lot of years, but for the last couple, that's what we've found. And we're giving lots of tips for camping and things like that. So that's awesome. I do have some more questions for you, and we're about out of time. But let's see. You've lived in Nebraska all your life. What has being a tourist in your own state shown you that you didn't know already?
I think, and one reason that really compels me to continue writing about Nebraska and now this year, especially to write about Lincoln, is it's always astounded me when I've talked to my friends and they haven't been to a lot of the places. And I think that is different about Nebraska is the fact that there are just so many wonderful museums and unique attractions, and there's so much history here. Just even writing my book, A History Lover's Guide to Lincoln, I went over my workout just because there's so many stories to tell. And so I think my encouragement to anyone, whether they're coming a long ways to Nebraska or any places there, is to talk to those people that you come in contact with, because there's so many interesting stories to tell that you miss out on if you just make assumptions, oh, there's nothing to see here, there's nothing to do here, because there's always just great possibilities. And so I think that that's been my favorite part just about writing about my state is there's so much that I learned about people that have made a difference and people that are brave and exploring places that maybe were unfamiliar. And so that's just my encouragement to travelers is don't be afraid to get off. That's really the point of my Detour Nebraska is if we stick to the quick roads, we're always going to miss out. Whereas if we're willing to, when we're driving by and it says such and such a museum at this spot or such and such a even playgrounds and parks, there's so much history to all of those as well. And so it's just being willing to get off and get out of specific plans. And that's when you really start to enjoy the trip more.
Totally. I agree with you. And this is what travel writers do. They encourage everyone to explore. And I just love that. That was amazing. Colorado Martini says, Nebraska is just up the roads from us. I'm in northern Colorado. Go Buff, bet the Husker. LOL.
Yes. That is. Yep, we're back with a rivalry again with Colorado. So
there you go.
Just to answer, I think somebody had asked about paranormal. I know that the bigger cities for sure have paranormal tours. There are several that happen in Lincoln where you can do a walking tour of I know that there's a haunted places in Lincoln book. So they could definitely look that up if they're interested in that type of traveling.
Nice. One more question. If you have just another second, we enjoy talking about food. I do two live shows a week, Travel Tuesday and Foodie Friday. So what is one thing I have to eat if I come to Nebraska? What's the total Nebraska thing to eat? Okay.
I have to say Runza. And that's actually what I'm having for lunch today. In Runza, it's kind of fun. On Tuesdays, they have temperature Tuesdays during the winter. So you pay whatever the price of the temperature is outside, plus you buy either onion rings and a drink, and then you get their runzas. But runzas are basically a breaded sandwich, and it's filled So it's rectangular shape, but it's bread that's filled with a cabbage and hamburger mixture. So it sounds a little bit odd, but it's a nod to our German roots here in Nebraska. And so it's the special filled sandwich called a runza. So if I could only pick one place, I would do that just because it's definitely a unique thing. But they have locations all across the state and even actually into Colorado. So you should definitely try runza. That would be where I would take you.
Okay. Runza, guys. We have to try runza. All right. Final thoughts here. Lee Johnson says Nebraska Passport is another fun challenge in the same vein. And was that the Great Park Pursuit that you were talking about?
It's an additional one. And I'm so glad he mentioned that. So every year, Nebraska Tourism picks 70 to 80 places, and you go around and you get a stamp. And they're found all across the state, and they featured everything from a brewery to hometown shops to restaurants to historical places. And that is really fun. They also have prizes. And so our family's done the Nebraska Passport a lot of years. It's just a good excuse to go to that place that you've always wanted to try and maybe haven't taken the time to do so.
Awesome. Well, man, I have so enjoyed talking to you today, Gretchen. I'm so glad that you could be here on Travel Tuesday. And
thank you for including me. Maybe I'll have to tell you more about Lincoln food places. That's been my biggest struggle on this 100 Things Lincoln is I could write about 100 different restaurants to eat at in Lincoln. That was kind of fun too. And thank you also to the Rogers House for letting me talk to you from their sunroom. What a pretty place to get to visit.
That's amazing. And I'm so glad that they allowed that and that they, welcomed you into their bed and breakfast for the day. What a neat place to have an interview. So if you'll hang out for just a minute, I'm going to close out the show.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys, I need you to do 3 things for me. 1, go over and visit Gretchen at odysseythroughnebraska.com. And also just visit her, mention that you saw her on Happy Trails Hiking, and say hello. Also, 2, make sure that you hit the thumbs up on this live show and share it with someone else that you think needs to find out a little bit about traveling in Nebraska. 3rd thing, or part 2B, is to come back and leave a comment after this live show posts. That'll let YouTube know that I'm doing something that you kind of like. All right. Now, 3rd thing, I want you to go out and live the life you love today. And remember, you are not replaceable. Happy travels, guys. See you later.